Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to my At Family Office podcast and platform. I have a real winner today. If you're live, by the way, we're a Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning, my time. Not something I do often, but we have such a special guest. I'm so excited to have him on. We're calling this While Rome Burns, Building Regenerative Empires. I know some of you don't like that word, but I'm going to go with it. Empires in collapsing systems. Our special guest today is Philip Marcovici, who specializes in tax, wealth management, and family governance, advising institutions, governments, and families. And it's that trio, that combination, that makes Philip, for me, a very intriguing guest. He holds advisory positions at HKUST and Cambridge. He's the author of, and we will talk about, his great book, The Transformative Power of Family Wealth, helping families and their communities capture its regenerative potential. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Angelo.
Let's get right to it. I've been looking forward to this. I have a lot of questions, a lot to learn, and maybe some giving back, going back. You've written extensively, I would say, about wealth concentration. But when push comes to shove, well, sovereign states really hold the ultimate power, monetary policy, taxation, and rather bluntly, force if needed. At what point does private wealth accumulation become irrelevant if states can simply confiscate, inflate, or regulate it away? Are ultra wealthy families deluding themselves about the true definition of what is actually sovereignty?
So, Angelo, it's a good way to kick off what I hope is going to be an interesting dialogue between us about the role of wealth owners and business owners in society, governments, and otherwise. The short answer to your opening question is really that private wealth exists within the political order. And at the end of the day, it doesn't exist outside of the political order. And we need to really understand that very well in the interests of all stakeholders. I'm a great believer, and that's what I've been writing about in my book, Transformative Power of Family Wealth. But I'm a great believer that wealth and business owners have a demonstrated ability to contribute to economies over the long term. However, we need wealth owners themselves to understand their responsibility as wealth owners, but we also need governments to understand how they can work together to create a world that addresses huge challenges that we have, including extreme income and wealth inequality. But the bottom line to the question that you've asked is, as I say, that private wealth exists within the political order, and wealth is only legitimate if there's a trust in society about wealth owners. We're coming into a very, very dangerous time, and it means that wealth owners have to be very aware of the question that you asked, which is really relating to, is private wealth a kind of illusion? That gets into a whole area of political risk minimization, a topic that I'm happy to get into with you, but something very much neglected in the planning a lot of wealth and business owners do is to not reflect carefully on the political risk that they face. And you've highlighted one area, only one area of many in relation to political risk.
That opens up a lot of questions and follow up, and very eloquent. You used the word political order. If you don't mind, could I have your definition of that, at least within the confines of our discussion, knowing that my audience will tend to be ultra high net worth and family offices?
So first of all, let me tell you that I have an absolute allergy to the phrase ultra high net worth and ultra high net worth and ultra high net worth. At the end of the day, the issues that we're discussing today, at least from my perspective, affect everyone. And any level of wealth is enough wealth to destroy a family. Any level of wealth is enough to be transformative for that family and for society. So I just make that comment. The ultra wealthy term is a very subjective one, not really an objective one. And I'm just a believer that what we're talking about is really about wealth and business owners.
And back to the question of political order, what does that mean to you?
So political order, the way the world runs at the moment is we have individual countries. We have individual countries and a number of things that they try to do together, but we have individual countries. Political order for me is the political system of each of those countries. And when we come to wealth and business owners, they sometimes think that society and political order is optional. Among your questions that you might ask me as we go along in this discussion, there might be a discussion about mobility and the fact that wealth and business owners, because of the fact they have homes in different places, perhaps they've planned well and they have multiple passports and residences, they can choose which society, in a sense, to be part of, making it optional. But when I talk about political order, I'm talking that every country has its own political system, and wealth resides within that political system. We also have developments, many initiatives where countries cooperate, including in the area of taxation. And very important for the wealth and business owners to be very much aware of that. A very good example are the OECD Pillar 2 rules, or the global minimum tax. There's a whole regime in and around ensuring that there's a minimum tax of 15% on very large enterprises. That also affects family-owned businesses and family-owned wealth. Those same rules are the rules that are the basis for initiatives and discussions that are going on about a global wealth tax that also has a big impact on wealth and business owners to be aware of. It's not something that might be implemented immediately, but the global minimum tax already exists, and other conversations are going on in a very, very active way. So, long answer to your question, what do I define as political order? You have the political system of the country you may be attached to as a resident, or where you're investing, or where you may have your ownership vehicles. And then you also have the international political order, which are the alliances between countries and rules that may impact wealth and business owners, regardless of where they may be.
Okay. I mean, I'm hearing you talk, and I know what you just described. I could also say the CRS, for the Common Reporting Standard. The US and multiple countries are not a part of it, but a lot of countries, including to a surprise of some, Switzerland and Singapore are. Although Europe, of course, is a multitude of countries, many of them are part of the EU. So collaboration, for lack of a better word, or governmental oversight, maybe a verbiage that I would use a little bit. I couple that with the WEF, also, of course, based out of Europe. And I don't mean to ask it from this perspective, and maybe me growing up in the US, but traveling the world, but being very much into personal liberties and freedoms, which is part of my constitution where I am. Apparently, I can't say what I want in countries like UK and arguably most other countries. And if I go there, I should know the rules and I should follow them. You would be correct. I feel, as I ask the context of that question, and especially the second half of it, are ultra wealthy families, as I defined it, deluding themselves, or take away ultra wealthy, are families deluding themselves about actual sovereignty. To some degree, they are. No matter where they go, a government is going to have a set of standards, rules, and enforcement of it. Henceforth, is arbitrage from a tax perspective or a perception of personal freedoms, whether it's a foothold in the US, another country, New Zealand, it may not matter. But these are things they're looking at. Are governments driving away successful entrepreneurial families that pay taxes, that contribute to philanthropy and employ people by onerous policy? Maybe I'll put it that way.
So you've raised, many issues, and I'll try to touch on a couple of the issues in the question that you've raised. I'll try to, touch on each one individually. First of all, unlike you, I'm not American. I'm a Canadian. And unlike you, I don't have the respect for the US Constitution that you have, not only because I'm not American, but because I observe not only the current situation in the United States, but also how the U.S. has dealt with the kind of issues that we're talking about, in past administrations. So it's not an immediate criticism I'm making. It's just that I have certain views, and those views link into what you mentioned, Angelo, about CRS, or the Common Reporting Standard. CRS, the Common Reporting Standard, which is an information exchange system that operates pretty much everywhere in the world. There are exceptions. The biggest, of course, is exactly as you say, the United States. The system was actually based on an American initiative when the exchange of information that the US put in place regarding American citizens and residents was implemented, the FATCA rules.
Of course.
And it was really those rules that were not reciprocal when they were first set up, where information was flowing into the US about Americans and what they were doing abroad. That encouraged countries around the world to say, we need to collaborate on ensuring that we really can address tax evasion. The reality is countries need to provide education, healthcare, and other services to the population. Even the wealthy benefit from having good roads and having a safe country to live in. That means we can't rely only on philanthropy. Taxation has to come into it. I'm not somebody who believes in confiscatory taxation, but I lived in Switzerland between 1995 and 2010 and was practicing as a lawyer there. And I can tell you that not only Switzerland, but certainly Switzerland, among others, was a leader in what I'll refer to as industrialized tax evasion, assisting wealth and business owners from around the world as a business to evade tax. The fact the US has not participated in CRS, I don't view as a positive. I view as the US taking over the role of Switzerland in many respects and being the place wealth and business owners from countries from Latin America, Asia, other parts of the world misuse that US system. And that's going to come back to bite both US financial services providers. It's going to come back to bite them in the future. But in the bigger picture, it's going to come back to bite wealth and business owners generally. Because when you're not responsible as a wealth and business owner, you increase the fragility of your ability to preserve and maintain wealth over generations. You encourage that political systems don't protect the wealth and business owners. And the rhetoric around the world, not just in the US, is very much in and around inequality, which is real and meaningful. And so I'm a great believer in all of that. At the same time, I may sound like I'm an extreme, believer in high taxation. That's not at all what I believe in. I believe in tax systems that are simple, fair, and low rate, and not complex as they are today. I'm also a believer that wealth and business owners have to navigate an increasingly dangerous world, which is there. You and I agree fully that the world is increasingly dangerous. And that suggests diversification, not only of investments, which everyone talks about. If I went to an asset manager and I said, how do you recommend that I structure my assets? Every asset manager will say, well, you should diversify in different currencies, different asset classes, etc. There's not enough focus on the need to diversify the ownership of wealth at the ownership level because of the risks that exist in the world and challenge wealth and business owners. That means it's very healthy to have family members in different countries. It's very healthy to have different buckets of assets in different countries. It's very good to anticipate, not wait for the certainty of issues that can arise in and around expropriation and other things that come into the picture. Our countries, last thing that I'll say before you can ask me more questions, our countries are driving away wealth owners. Absolutely. And I'm sitting at the moment in the UK. You're sitting in the US. I'm in London at the moment. This country is completely nuts in terms of its tax policies. It had a system in place that had attracted many wealth and business owners called the non-domiciliary system. It was not a good system. I was very supportive of the government taking that system away, but it was completely stupid of the government to take it away without replacing it with something that recognizes the role of wealth and business owners who are responsible in a society. And as a result, wealth and business owners who could be contributing to the UK economy are now sitting in Dubai, Singapore, Hong Kong, Milan, Athens, and a number of other places in the world. And last thing that I'll say about your lovely country, there's a quarterly list of expatriates that's published by the IRS, and it's very interesting to see that quarterly list of people giving up US citizenship every year is not a short list of wealth and business owners fleeing the United States.
Whoa, a tremendous amount of complexity to your very intellectual answer, which I appreciate. And your comment relative to the UK appreciated from my perspective. We may come back to that one within the grand confines a little bit later. Now, no question, there's way more people that want to come into the US for a variety of reasons that want to get out. But the US is one of those countries, and very few, that has an incredibly onerous tax system that effectively, not effectively, literally, figuratively, any word you want, follows you everywhere. And there are people, you're probably going to state, Angelo, it's not as much about the tax or estate picture. It's because the civil unrest and challenges with the current president, and maybe other presidents that may come, either on the left or right, that make people uncomfortable, and some people want more stability. All things will potentially, if we have time. I'm somewhat known for 2 or 3 hour interviews, so I'm going to have to cut something short to my promise to you to keep it within 1 hour. A couple of comments. Ironically, I didn't know you were Canadian. My other guest, who also is based in Europe this past week, an attorney also at trade, David Lesparance, is also from Canada. So just the irony
I know
there.
David. I know David very well. So
small world.
yeah.
That was a 2.5 hour interview about sovereign strategies around the world. There's a lot of things there. I do want to actually, let's focus on this one, on taxes. Given that I'm not going to say I'm a libertarian, I'm not, but I skew to libertarian policies. I do believe incredibly in personal freedom. So for me, the Constitution in the US allows me more freedoms than I believe I would get in the vast majority of countries around the world. I do think the creation of the Fed and the IRS, ironically, I believe the same year, 1913, leading then into World War I. Again, a lot of historical and context we could discuss. But I brought this question up to David. Maybe it's a little tongue-in-cheek, Philip, but it's a little bit of seriousness behind it. Do we really, at least in the US, need taxes? We're learning that tariffs may be something that's intriguing and could work. The VAT, which you're going to be familiar with, sales tax. Now, I could be a wise guy and say we could print money. We're the world reserve currency. I am not saying that's a good idea. We have enough problems already. But I am saying, do countries, and I mean this seriously, do countries need to reconsider, especially if they have a little bit of the hammer like the US, the need for taxation?
So I'd like to answer your question. So to give you a short nutshell, I struggle to be able to answer your question by saying there's no need for taxation. I'm not a believer in tariffs and all this kind of thing. But by the way, that's taxation. So you can't in one breath say we can remove taxation because we have tariffs. You can't say we're removing taxation because we have value-added taxes, VAT. These are all taxes. They're all different forms of taxes. So my answer will be that we don't need the complexity of the US tax system, nor do we need the complexity of the UK or the Canadian or the Australian or the German. There are countries around the world who have tax systems that are unfairly complex. When I say unfairly complex, they are tax systems that are full of loopholes, full of areas where if you can afford to get good tax advice, you can legally avoid incredibly exposure to taxes in many, many circumstances, in many, many examples. Now, to put all the eggs in the VAT value-added tax basket and all the eggs in the tariff basket is moving to a very regressive tax system. A regressive tax system is a tax system that taxes those who cannot afford things more than it taxes those who can afford things. So I'm a believer in moving towards tax systems that actually exempt from taxation. those who are in greatest need, particularly in a country like the US, where shockingly there is inadequate support in healthcare, where shockingly access to education is challenged because of the way the system works and the cost of higher education in the US, particularly in a country like the US. Absolutely, there's a need for the right kind of taxation. Now, the right kind of taxation, insofar as it relates to wealth and business owners, in my view, comes closer to flat rate tax systems with very few, if any, deductions, with a very transparent approach, low rate tax systems without high headline rates that are not real. A headline rate is when a country says, our maximum tax rate is 45% or 50% or whatever it is. But there's a reality that then if you're a real estate developer and you're taking depreciation deductions and you're doing all kinds of financings and all things, you end up paying zero. That kind of tax system to me is faulty because it becomes very complex and unfair. A better tax system is one where you just have a flat rate of 20% or 15% or 22% or whatever it might be, and no deductions. But where you also need to go is in broadening the tax base, meaning that there should be a number of different taxes in different areas to create the needed revenue for government, which includes a VAT possibly, but with exemptions that make sure that the system is addressing the regressive elements of it. So when it comes to buying groceries, there shouldn't be VAT on groceries. When it comes to buying your new Ferrari, absolutely there should be VAT on that Ferrari. So that's the kind of vision that I would have. And coming into this is something that, of course, is going to make your beard fall off when I tell you this. But what it is that as part of a system that has broad levels of taxation, there's no reason to be afraid of opening the door to talking about wealth taxation as part of it. And there's no need to avoid saying there may be small elements of inheritance taxation that come into the picture as well. Not at huge rates of 35 and 40 and 50%, not at 90%, as maybe Thomas Piketty would put forward, but at low acceptable rates of 5 or 10%, all moving towards a world where wealth and business owners realize that comes back to your first question, in order for their family to sustain their wealth and business interests over generations, in order to allow them not only to contribute to the well-being of their own family, but to the well-being of their employees and to society generally, they need to be focusing on contributing to a trusted government that understands the role of wealth and business owners. So the onus is not at all only on wealth and business owners in all of this. We need governments that actually understand and don't want to drive away wealth owners and don't fall into the political trap of bashing wealth and business owners when the reality is they're best placed to help economies, not hurt economies, if we work together in the right way.
And on that note, and maybe a little build up of what you said, which of course I would agree with on the UK about 5 or 10 minutes ago, here in the United States, specifically in California, you're familiar with the specific wealth tax, aka the billionaire tax that's proposed, and likely if it's a percentage of the population above 50%, people would rather punish the rich than help the poor. My quote doesn't mean it's correct. Let's assume it's likely to pass. Therefore, already the co-founders of Google and others before the first of the year, and I had this deep conversation with L'Esperance, effectively started to change, let's broadly go with the word, their state domicile. Do you think that's a good idea for California? Or I'm assuming a little bit more with your comment about the UK, it may not be the smartest move, but what's the impetus behind it?
Yeah, for me, you're going to see more and more of these kinds of initiatives around the
Yes,
world.
I agree with you.
For wealth and business owners, it's a very good lesson to see. Do I think it's a good idea for California to go ahead and put this in place? Not at all, because it's not part of a well thought out system of collaboration between the relevant jurisdiction and the wealth and business owners. That collaboration requires a real trust. What I'm an advocate of is a country first embracing the idea that wealth and business owners can contribute to society, then a government that understands that having a regenerative tax system that actually increases wealth for everyone in society, for all stakeholders, is really what the ultimate goal is. And if wealth and business owners then are offered by the relevant government a feeling that there won't be chop and change in tax systems, there will be real investment in security and safety for family, business-friendly approaches, consistency in the approach going forward, wealth and business owners are ready to pay more if they're getting more in return. And so there are lots of ways to do this in very, very friendly ways. Part of this also may open the door to discussions about the hypothecation of elements of taxation. What that means is there may need to be certain elements of tax. Economists don't like hypothecation, but certain elements of tax should be actually not really called tax, but they should be amounts that the taxpayer, the person paying it, can actually decide where that money goes. So if I'm a resident of the UK, for example, why not allow me, in relation to 25% of the tax I pay, to designate that I'd like that money to go to help pay for the National Health Service, for the NHS, or for education, or for other purposes, and actually for wealth owners who are the contributors to that money going to those services, having an ability to be part of the governance of how that money is spent, because we have a real issue of trust of how governments spend their money around the world. So there are a lot of things, there are a lot of things to unpack in all of this. Sadly, tax is very, very complex. I made my living for many, many years because of that complexity. There are many other tax lawyers who make their living from that complexity. But my focus these days is much more on the reality that we're coming into an extremely dangerous time in the world. And if any of your listeners are interested, the work I'm doing at Cambridge University with the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership is exploring exactly these issues. There's a multi-generational leadership program there where it's challenging. We try to talk about these things in a way that recognizes that there is an alignment possible between the interests of society, the urgent interests of society, and the interests of wealth and business owners in a really win-win-win way.
You mentioned the word inequality a couple of times. Again, if we had multiple hours, we could get into evolutionary psychology, biology. Sure, equal opportunity, but not equal outcomes. I would love to be a professional. You would call it football, I would call it soccer. I'm just not good enough, and never was, no matter what I ate, what I took, or what coaches I have. Uh, the Now, what I want to circle back to on it is probably going to be a little bit of a layup for you, but then I'm going to challenge it a little bit in a different perspective. And that would be, should Americans and others be somewhat familiar with, when there is tremendous wealth inequality, how things could go very wrong? We could look at the French Revolution probably being the big one, AKA the rich could get overrun, get their heads cut off, and that could happen in civil unrest. In Russia, of course, within a little more than 100 years ago. I could argue with Nazi Germany. There's lots of history that could tell us that things could go very wrong. If you could talk a little bit of your perspective about that from a historical perspective and where the trends may be headed.
So, Angelo, there we agree 100%. There's the outcomes that you've described, from history and things that can happen. They're already happening. Wealth owners in many countries already live behind walls. They live behind walls. They have security guards. Their children have to go to school, in bulletproof cars. They have to have security consultants who are helping them deal with kidnapping. They are subjected to tax changes that are confiscatory, that amount to expropriation of assets. So we agree totally about that. And, what I would very much encourage, and one of the things that in my book I talk about, is that families plan by looking forward in the future of how they see the ecosystem of their family and their wealth, what they see that looking like in 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, and then think carefully, what are the derailers, the things that can go wrong that can stop them to get to the outcome that they want to get to. And the kind of things that you're talking about absolutely are on the roadmap. I mean, during the pandemic, there were conversations in the German parliament about a one-off wealth tax. That the conversation was about the fact that if you warn people that the wealth tax is coming, they will plan around it. So you need to do it in a way where they're not warned in advance. We've seen that in recent history in Cyprus, where there were bank levies where basically you went to sleep on Friday with $10 million in your account. You woke up on Monday and there was 6 million in your account.
Yes.
And you were told that's taxation. That to me is not taxation. That's expropriation of your assets.
Exactly.
So we're in total agreement about that. And for me, it's personally a difficult area to navigate, because I know the importance of wealth and business owners to society and economies, because I work with wealth and business owners around the world. And I know that they are more responsible in general as owners of wealth and business than short-term thinking CEOs of public companies who are in it for a couple of years, raping the company and getting out. But that said, these wealth and business owners are coming into a very, very challenging time. And then you also have the flip side, plenty of wealth and business owners who are irresponsible, totally irresponsible. And some of your questions that you touched on at the very beginning may lead you to also talking about, what happens with changes in technology and AI. We're also coming into a world where clearly wealth and business owners are becoming like governments in some ways, controlling the system. And that becomes very, very dangerous, because they are not elected people. They just find themselves controlling the technology that then controls information. And in effect, they end up controlling where the world is going. So we're coming into a time of enormous challenge for wealth and business owners. One of the things that I do that's a lot of fun for a couple of families is I actually sit on some committees where, together with some other professionals, all we do is talk about the long-term future and how that may impact the family that we are representing, and what we need to do today to deal with risks that we think will come in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 50 years, and 100 years.
Oh, there's so much there, Philip. And again, I do want to keep things flowing a little bit. I'm a deep dive kind of person, so my hands are a little tied, audience. Maybe we could get an extra 5 or 6 minutes from Philip at the top of the hour. We'll see. I hear what you're saying relative to concern about people in technology and AI that are becoming potentially all powerful. Let's just name names. It could be a Sam Altman. It could be an Elon Musk. Versus maybe, quote unquote, the Chinese government. And AI is coming down. It's very simple. It's the US and China. We could get into a really deep discussion on that. We're not going to have time. My comment on what you said, you're probably more, I'll go with the word trusting of governments, having more checks and balances and control. I tend to be skeptical of governments that tend to be bureaucratic, tax heavy, slow, and at the end of the day, they're in it for their own benefit and for those that get them elected. Every politician that I know in the US, number one goal is to get elected, number two goal to get reelected, and probably number three, when it's time to move on, how could I benefit from that and make a lot of money? A little cynical, but relatively mostly true, sadly. After having some actual somewhat agreements in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to maybe upset that wild card a little bit. But right before I get that, I think perfectly timed with what you said in my comment, multi-generational families potentially think on 100-year timelines. Now, we could chuckle at that and say, Angelo, we don't know what's coming next year. AI is changing everything. I agree. But let's go with my comment. Multi-generational families operate in 100-year timelines. Nation states, at least in the US, and most other countries, operate on 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years? How do families preserve wealth and maybe a scary word, influence, when the institutions around them are structurally incapable of long-term thinking?
Well, I guess, I remain a little bit of an optimist. So a couple of things. First, there are families that I know very well who even plan well beyond 100 years. I'm working with a family where, they're talking about 1,000 years, and
Love it.
they're and that's it's an ambitious thing. But if you talk about multi-generational wealth, you're considering lots of issues, and lots of challenges that come. Now, yes, governments in many parts of the world, in most parts of the world, you have this sort of short 4-year or 5-year cycle, and then families have a much different cycle. The bottom line answer is governments can and do work together in tandem and with wealth and business owners in a collaborative way, where there's a real openness of dialogue, and that is what can work. And if you look back in history, there have been periods of history where that has been very successful for countries. I mean, the UK historically has been that case, and there are families, the Cadburys and Rothschild, and there are many families who, long term, in and out of politics, not for self-interest, but actually for contribution to society. I don't want to make too many comments about your country, but no, I can't, because no, I can't. The reality is that there is a way that can work. I'm a real believer in that, but it's challenging for the reasons that you say. It's also challenging because it's becoming politically very difficult to do anything that has the appearance of helping wealth and business owners. Rather, we need to communicate and get the message across very well. But if you look at a government like the Singapore government, for example, Singapore has done a very, very good job of beginning to address, they're not as far as they need to be, but beginning to address income and wealth inequality. There's a great investment in social health care. There's great investment in government housing. There's huge benefit to wealth and business owners who live and work in Singapore. There's a real, almost collaborative approach and an understanding between government and wealth and business owners. And the way the government operates in Singapore is the people that you're dealing with, when you're dealing with the Singapore government, actually know what they're doing. And they're not doing it because they want to benefit personally and they want to make money. A lot of them are people who, towards the end of very successful careers, come into public service as a true service. And so coming back to, again, your first question, wealth and business owners need to recognize they exist within a political system, and what works best is when they are part of that political system and there's a collaboration, and not with a sense of what can I, steal, but rather from the perspective of how can I ensure that the society that I'm part of is a society that truly cares about everyone in our society.
And Philip, I'm going to maybe get to a little bit of the slightly uncomfortable part of the discussion. Never take it personally. I have great respect for your background. I'm learning so much from you and can't wait to really read your book in full and for us to have future conversations. But I will throw this question out there. Even in the titling, when it came to advising institutions, governments, I'm going to emphasize the word governments and families, your earlier take effectively on global tax, some of the comments on the US, and my comment, not yours, relative to the WEF. But I'm going to bring that together and say, tremendous respect for your intellectual rigor and all that I'm learning. It does have a little bit of a vibe and sound of a little bit of a globalist type agenda about big government, about all one government, about maybe we should be under all one order. Now, that is going to eventually lead down the road. It's practically inevitable of central bank digital currencies and governments having tremendous control and power. So I go to that question from my perspective. Maybe it's a compliment. I don't know how you would think of it. It sounds very globalist, and maybe as an overly independent, freedom-loving, let's go with the word American. I know the international audience is going to hate me now, but they hate me already. Where am I wrong? It does feel that way to me, with all due respect.
So let me make a couple of comments. I mean, it'll be interesting for you to read my book, The Transformative Power of Family Wealth. And by the way, the book tries to be optimistic and is a second book that I've written in and around wealth and business owners. The first one that I wrote is called The Destructive Power of Family Wealth, which is a book about how wealth destroys families, destroys businesses. We all sometimes envy those who have more. The reality is every family that I know that has any wealth are nuts. But anyways, that's another subject. But I'll, focusing on the question that you've asked, one of the things that I cover in the Transformative Power of Family Wealth, and I mention, is that I was reading a book that was written by one of my classmates, Peter Hulsroy, together with a collaborator. He wrote a book called The Optional Society. And I read this book that he wrote, and it's about, the options you have in society. Very, very interesting book, but I just love the name of it, The Optional Society. And it led me to ask myself, is society optional, particularly for wealth and business owners who have this ability, to move from one place to the other, to be resident from a tax perspective where they want, give up citizenship, take citizenship. They have the wealth to do that. Is society optional? And my conclusion is no, society is not optional. If there's no planet, your business and your family is not going to sustain over multiple generations. If you don't accept the reality of the challenges our planet is facing, both from a climate change point of view, from the point of view of income and wealth inequality, from many, many other perspectives, if you don't accept that, your family cannot sustain over multiple generations. Now, that said, you're accusing me of being a globalist, I'm not sure being a globalist is such a bad thing. That said, I'm actually a huge believer that we do need, for wealth and business owners and everyone else, the freedom to move from one place to the other, the freedom to have rights to privacy, the freedom to organize in those ways. And in fact, it's necessary to have that freedom for wealth and business owners to navigate the dangers of today's world. And again, now to make it a little bit more specific, like the UK, where I'm sitting right now, where the government denies that wealth and business owners have been fleeing the UK, when the reality is they have and are fleeing the UK. The UK is going to find out more about that when they see the revenues declining, which they will see, but it's more the lost opportunity. The reality is we need that mobility. However, in the years to come, that mobility is going to be constrained. And one of the predictions that I'll make to you is that we're going to see more and more countries putting in place exit taxes. The US already has an exit tax. Canada has an exit tax.
Yes.
We're going to see more and more countries that put exit taxes in place.
I agree.
And also the current ability to have multiple citizenships, which I am a great believer that it's good to have many citizenships, given the need to have this freedom of mobility. That's not going to continue in the longer term, and wealth and business owners need to be aware of that too. There are countries, Singapore is an example, where you cannot have more than one citizenship. That's going to happen more and more. And as much as I'm not a great lover of the fact that the US taxes citizens on a worldwide basis, regardless of where they live,
we agree.
I would predict that in the future we will see more and more countries having some form of taxation for being a citizen, regardless of where you live. And coming back to what I said very much earlier in the conversation, I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing, because I'm not saying it should be at full rates or, bringing you into the US complex system. But if the UK or other countries had some rules that said, if you're a citizen not living in the country, there is a cost to that, that's simple to calculate, transparent, that's not, confiscatory, why not? To help pay for what the UK has to pay for in terms of military and healthcare and all these other things which people can take advantage of. So these are all complex topics. I'd encourage you sign up to come to our Cambridge program, because it would be fun to have you there and to have some of your listeners there.
Well, it's very kind of you. I got to be careful not to tweet or anything. I may get a knock on the door. Actually, Philip, I'm surprised what you said about UK being ignorant to quote unquote a lot of the rich leaving that support philanthropy, jobs, and taxation. I We may have to wrap up so you don't get that knock on the door. I'm only kidding. I want more of your time, not less. That does segue into my next question. It was somewhat strategic. Historically, wealth confiscation requires physical force, revolution, invasion, etc. Today, it can be more algorithmic, if I could use that word, from inflation, bad monetary policy, financial repression, capital controls, ESG mandates. You hinted at one earlier that we probably have a disagreement on, AKA for climate levies. Which is more dangerous for wealthy families, kind of the mob with pitchforks, the days in the past, or a technocrat with keystroke?
I think there's no question that the technocrat with keystroke is, in the bigger picture, more dangerous. I mean, if the mob with a
100%.
pitchfork kills me, that's pretty dangerous. They can burn the city down, they can cause a lot of havoc, and they can do all kinds of bad things. But it's the technocrat who can redesign how civilization works and have a huge impact on the wealth and business owner, which comes back to what I said about political risk minimization. That's a form of political risk, or it's a derailer, let's call it, if you don't want to call it political risk. It's a derailer to a wealth and business owning families being able to get from where they are today to their goal of being together as a wealth and business owning family in 100 years or 500 years. And as a result, there are steps they need to take in view of that risk of the technocrats redesigning civilization in such a way that you don't really notice what they've done until they've already done it. And there are things that you can do.
That is for sure. And again, so much we could dive into from your comment there. But I think I do have to get to an important crux of our conversation. You hinted at it a couple of minutes ago, and we do have to include it. And that is effectively within 10, 15 years, we're looking, my perspective, at near zero marginal cost for energy. I think AI will effectively solve for fusion energy. There's other solutions, and labor effectively through AI and robotics. If the economic foundation of capitalism, when labor and energy, not 50 years out, arguably 7 or 10, more likely 10 to 20, go to near zero, capitalism as we know it, and you're talking to a cowboy hat wearing American, is going to have to change significantly, because it just will. Effectively, it may disappear as we know it. What happens to wealth as we define it by monetary in that scenario? Now, I could get into the negative part, one world order, central bank digital currency, flip a switch, and I have no access to capital. So this is a multifaceted question, maybe the most important one, as I built up to in our conversation. What is your perspective?
I think the short answer to, a very big question and a very important question is to say that there's no question that, AI robotics is having an impact in terms of increasing rapidly the fragility of the social contract that we have. And that fragility is just highlighting the risks that wealth and business owners face if they don't participate as responsible wealth and business owners in addressing these issues in society. So what we need to talk about are things that I'm sure you're going to be very unhappy to hear mentioned. Things like a minimum income for everyone. Things like national health care that is taking care of the health care of those who are going to lose their jobs because of AI. We need to talk about access to education and so many other elements that actually support the views that I'm putting forward. My views being, we need to urgently encourage dialogue between governments, wealth and business owners, journalists, society as a whole, to embrace, not reject, the role that wealth and business owners can play in moving to a world that benefits from these technological changes and we don't need to then be as afraid of these changes. Meanwhile, many of the things I think that you've mentioned, Angelo, are quite long term. What I deal with the families that I work with, who tend to be mostly Asian families, Middle Eastern families, European families, their businesses are not under immediate challenge in these areas. The kind of areas that they're working in, hospitality and manufacturing and all of these things, yes, there are changes that are happening very rapidly, but they're adapting to those changes already. And many of the families that I'm working with are embracing the kind of changes that you're discussing. But I want to end my answer to your question by again saying what you've raised increases the rapidity of fragility in society. That is part of the conversation that we're having. It increases the urgency of wealth and business owners to think that perhaps there's a way that they can help influence governments in a positive way to protect those in society who will be hurt the most. It won't be the wealthy who are hurt the most. It's going to be the people who live from their paycheck day to day and who no longer are going to have that paycheck. And in a society like yours, in your country, where they don't have any proper health care and they have very limited access to education, that's only going to increase the mob that is going to decapitate wealth and business owners, if you want to end on a more dramatic note.
With all due respect, your home country of Canada, sure, it's going to provide. And I've been there multiple times, and I have multiple families there. Now, ones that are rich, no problem. They have the money, they can afford it. Getting quality specialist healthcare, it's not the quickest or easiest process. And education is going to be completely upended in a positive way. Now, we could talk about jobs and teachers that may not be so positive, but it's inevitable. In the end, tech always wins. AI is going to have an incredibly positive impact to education. We do have education K through 12. And yes, for colleges, you need to have a sense of commitment, pay for it. Student loans, we could get into many issues around that. So again, we have different perspectives, not just from where we were born and culturally, but that probably plays somewhat into it. But as we grow up, we form our own perspectives about things, and we have a very different feel about that. There is one thing that I did bring up twice, you did not address, and it's okay. And it probably plays into my concern over a one world order and policy, as I put it, a little dramatic. I'll agree with that. And that is central bank digital currencies that will give countries, like you said, relative to controlling potentially, arguably, passports, taxation, their ability to leave, multitude of different things. Woo, central bank digital currency that is programmed. And I'm getting a little deep on the crypto stuff here. A digital programming of central bank digital currencies effectively are going to give governments the ultimate power. Now, Trump claims he's not going to shepherd it in. Okay, he probably won't. But how about the next president, the one after that? Is it effectively inevitable? And I know I'm going down a combination of crypto and other things that may not be perfectly in the wheelhouse, but I was a little concerned you didn't address my issue on central bank digital currencies.
I guess I would answer your question by saying you're right. It's not really in my wheelhouse in the sense of focus. But what I will say is that, certainly the whole crypto area is one that is increasingly regulated. And what I warn people is not to think that it's somehow a way that you can, operate without governments knowing what you're doing, which fits right into your comment, which is, as a result of that, governments have more control, not less control, particularly if central banks are at the center of a digital currency and otherwise. I think we are many, many years away from an absolute globalized approach to this, I think. But in any event, I think for most wealth and business owning families and the kind of businesses that they're doing, it's not existential. I know that you believe it is existential. I don't view it as necessarily existential, but you're raising an area that absolutely is an important one, and that it would be interesting the next time that we meet to speak in more detail about how the risk is formed, because I myself, to be honest, I'd like to understand the risk better to help the families that I work with navigate that risk better. So maybe I can turn the question around to you and to ask you, in view of your concern, in a nutshell, what should a business and wealth owning family do today to minimize the risk that you anticipate in this area?
If they have great wealth, they have a level of influence, potentially politically and other ways. We could argue philanthropy. One of my questions, if we had an hour and a half, would do a deeper dive into philanthropy. And sometimes we could argue it really is for nefarious purposes, not just to avoid tax, but to influence policy. And yes, that is going to be an edge that people of wealth would have. From the perspective, as I describe it, I think programmable money, where if you're concerned, like you said, about climate change, I can't buy more than 3 pounds of meat as a family every month. That's horrific for someone like me who is very much on personal freedoms. I have a different perspective about climate change than you. I do agree it's a bit of an issue, but I'm probably not putting it in my top three. And I do believe AI infusion and a variety of factors will, let's broadly go with the word, solve for it. What solutions do families have? Understanding the problems, looking at things long term, having a level of influence, having diversity of relationships, money, and quote unquote passports in multiple countries. We don't get the tax arbitrage as a US citizen. Related to the programmable money part, that could lead down a deeper discussion about owning gold and commodities offshore, non-banking. We could go down, obviously, the road to Bitcoin. At the end of the day, which you kind of indirectly hinted at, in a long enough time frame, and maybe that's 30 or 50 years or longer, I don't know if there's anything that's going to stop a little bit of a 1 or 2 world order and effectively some level of central bank digital currency. If the spigot of money could be stopped by the government, then capital, stocks, etc. I could go down a very dark road. It tends to make my audience a little bit like, oh God, Angelo's.
Well, Angelo. I liked a lot of what's in your answer, and one of the things that you said is, influence. You said it several times.
Yes, of course.
Using your ability to influence. That's really the crux of what I'm trying to encourage, which is the use of the social capital that wealth and business owners have to have the dialogue with governments, to convince governments, and I think it's possible, and there are a few governments that have already been convinced of this, to convince governments that there is a way of designing the systems to protect wealth and business owners and protect governments and ensure a fairer society in future. And also, we're very much on the same page that the biggest protection families can really put in place is to think about diversification, as I touched on earlier, diversification of ownership, and also, as you've discussed, diversification of assets into different asset classes, including asset classes that fall outside of digital currencies and other things, hard assets, gold, and other things. So there's a lot in what you responded that I would very much agree with.
And we're not too far away from 10, 20, 30 years when space is going to be, well, one, it's going to be a battleground, but it may also be a new sovereign situation. A well-known person in crypto and in technology, Indian, but went to America, and I think he's out of America now. Balaji Servanson, I believe I'm pronouncing his last name right, talks basically about self-sovereignty, about we may form digital nation states, but a subject for a different time. I would ask, I had 2 questions that are a little quicker, but I do want to live up to my promise, at least in asking you, do you have 10 more minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And we've been building up a little bit into this, and we shockingly may even have some things where we come together a little bit on this one. And that is going to be the rise of socialism. In the US, most of our democratic leaders wearing that hat are obviously far left. We're looking at Newsom and what's going on in California. We're looking at the rise of AOC in New York, and the obvious one, the mayor of New York City, Mamdani. So rising socialism isn't just a policy. To me, it's a legitimacy crisis. When 50% of young people in America question whether capitalism should exist, what does that mean for families whose wealth is predicated on a system. Now, that doesn't even bring up what I said about AI, impactful to energy and labor, is going to change capitalism whether we like it or not. But effectively, the rise of tax the rich, broadly speaking, most people rather hurt the rich, be vindictive than really help the poor. So the rise of socialism, mainly in the US, broadly in the West, and the fact that 50% of young people under 30 basically think that capitalism shouldn't exist.
Well, I guess I'd start off by saying, like I don't like the terms, ultra high net worth and ultra high net worth. I also don't like the term socialism and how it's used, particularly in your country. Um, you know, the way the U.S. operates in terms of treating, the Democrats and the Republicans, it's like two football teams, and we're on one team or the other team. We're all in one planet, all of us, and we're all living together in societies around the world, and we need to come to grips with the responsibilities one has in their society. And everyone has responsibilities to society, and we need to work out what those responsibilities are and not put labels on them. I think that your lack of having an educated population in the United States has an impact on some of the things that you've mentioned.
Well, then how do we become, and I'm sorry, I've been pretty good at not interrupting, but I will make an exception this time. A lack of an educated population. We're by far the most successful country on earth. We have the most number of billionaires, Silicon Valley. We have a system
It depends, Angelo, it depends how you measure. Yeah, it depends how you measure success. I mean, if your measurement of success is look, anyways, that takes us down not the rabbit hole you wanted us to take down. Let me just really say that it's repeating a little bit what I've said earlier, but I don't think we need to be very much aware of the reality of what you're saying. Absolutely. Around the world, not only in the US, everywhere, there is a sense of wanting to bash the wealthy. I read the FT, which is not a left-wing newspaper, but more of a conservative newspaper. And I comment when there are discussions about the tax system and otherwise. And I'll tell you, when I read the comments people are posting about wealth and business owners leaving the UK, the vast majority of those comments are good riddance. We don't need you. Not comments that are saying, actually, we would like to find ways to keep you in our society because we know that you're contributing jobs, you're contributing in the future, you have the potential to contribute to the NHS and to all these other things. So, we are in violent agreement about the issues that are there. And what I believe is absolutely critical, again, is dialogue, and wealth and business owners have to be part of that dialogue to show how important they are and can be to economies. And we then need to develop systems that ensure that there then is real care for the realities of what is affecting the possibility of our planet surviving, including addressing income and wealth inequality. And I'm not an anti-libertarian. There are many things about libertarian views. I loved Ayn Rand when I was a kid and reading her. I have many libertarian instincts. However, equally, I understand very well human nature, and I've worked with wealth and business owners for many decades now in many geographies, if not all geographies of the world. There's a reality that in addition to philanthropy and freedom, we do need taxation. But we need taxation in the right way, and we need a comfort. You need to have a feeling you're paying tax for a good reason. And what you're raising in your question is the good reason. We need to show the population in general, we need to prove that this kind of system can work, that capitalism can work. Capitalism is a good thing. I'm not sure that we're doing a good job with that, either in the US or in other countries at the moment.
Perhaps the next time we talk, we'll do that deeper dive, as we promised, into philanthropy. And I could go from both arguments that someone like Soros is an incredibly negative impact globally and certainly to the US, and uses.
I need to jump in and say, philanthropy, particularly in the US, has been so misused and kidnapped and perverted in many cases. There's a lot of great philanthropy, of course, coming out of the US for sure. But having a tax system that allows you to take tax deductions to buy a painting of yourself and then hang it in your club, that's not a healthy system. And, charity, there are families in the US that have their businesses owned by charities, and they benefit from that. They use it as a tool to get around the social contract that they should be part of.
Partially,
I don't want to generalize.
No, you are not incorrect. There are abuses, partially due to the incredibly onerous nature of the U.S. tax system, with 79,000 pages that people of wealth and influence have protected lobbies and served their interest, whether right-leaning or left-leaning. There was certainly no doubt about that. But from what I see, Americans are far, far more charitable from a giving and philanthropic perspective than what I see in Asia and many other parts of the world.
I disagree.
Okay.
But go on. I think that in the US, yes, you have some very important philanthropists. There's no questions. You certainly have more public philanthropists, but I've spent most of my career working in Asia, and I can tell you that Asian families can be highly philanthropic in terms of what they're doing. So I'm not ready to agree with what you've just said. Not that you asked me to agree or not.
And I think we're going to have a deeper discussion on the philanthropic angle next time. So we'll each let that one go. My final question, because I do want to be, again, respectful of your time, and kind of maybe putting all of this together. From my perspective, we're watching simultaneously the breakdown of certainly trust in institutions, governments, media, academia, and I could argue partially rightfully so. There's many challenges in academia that I find gravely concerning. Family offices are somewhat creatures of institutional stability. What happens when there's no neutral arbiter, if that's the right word I'm looking for, no rule of law that I can really trust, and maybe, I think a word that you may like, no shared reality in our country, our community, and maybe broadly the world? I feel like we're in an unstable world with a lot of chaos, that the world that I knew growing up, I'm 60 years old, from 30, 40 plus years ago, I mean, maybe this is always the case. It no longer exists, and what could I do about it?
It may lead, excuse me, it may lead to a return to some of the positive ways of the world of the past. I don't know the answer fully to your question, but some of the families that I work with in Asia, the historical businesses in mainland China before the communist revolution were businesses where the family ran a business, also provided housing for their employees, education for their employees, retirement and health benefits, for the entire lives of their employees. Maybe we're going to be moving into a world where wealth and business owning families will realize they need to create their own society because the society around them is failing. And that's what you're mentioning. So there can be a variety of outcomes. It would be good to end our conversation, in a somewhat positive way. And the positive thing that I'll say is the conversation that we've had highlights the reality of the fragility of the society we're in. And wealth and business owners have a responsibility at a minimum to understand that fragility. And that takes some effort to really think about where we are today, where we want to be tomorrow, and how we can get there in the right way. There is no one right answer.
And Philip, a great way to end in your comment, but because you're a guest, I appreciate you coming on under what some would say is a little bit of fire here or there, but that adds a sharpening the knife and the steel by having good conversations lacks in my community, and I appreciate you. A closing comment, if you desire, and why your book is an important read for governments, for institutions, for families addressing some of these issues, and restate again what you're doing in Cambridge, please.
So I guess with the book, you've already touched on the main areas. I would also encourage, those who are advisors to wealth and business owner families to read the book. And I don't want to retain any sort of sense of copyright. I encourage advisors who read my book to use some of the ideas in terms of how to discuss these areas with families. These are complex areas, and I think we can, impact change in that way. And the last thing you asked about Cambridge, the program that I'm involved in is called the Multi-Generational Leadership Program at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. And what we try to address is the urgency of climate change, the urgency of income and wealth inequality, the urgency of all the challenges, or many of the challenges we are facing in communities and on our planet, and the special role wealth and business owning families can play. But also, very, very importantly, the fact that a wealth and business owning family itself will not be sustainable if the world around them is not sustainable. And when you link the objectives of a family to address their own internal sustainability to the greater ecosystem of the world, it really is an interesting conversation. So part of what we're doing at Cambridge is also getting in deep of how family businesses can organize themselves to really ensure that they are multi-generational and resilient to challenges like the kind of challenges and others that we discussed today. So I would encourage that. And then something that you're going to love is the fact that my own experience and my reason for working with Cambridge on this is very much that I want to encourage, as I've said many times, dialogue between wealth and business owners and society. And I find myself in a university, like many universities, that is very left thinking. And I don't like referring to left and right and middle and all these kind of areas, but part of my own personal mission is to also help influence the university and academics, who I agree sometimes fall into the trap of saying, let's just take away the wealth of the wealthy. And what I'm trying to do is really open a dialogue among all stakeholders. It's about understanding what we're all talking about. And I do have the confidence that if we could attract the right government attention, we actually can do quite a lot to change the world.
Well, that was a wonderful ending commentary from your perspective. I'm glad you admit that broadly about academia. It's obviously true. I could also argue tech. You could debate Elon be the exception, media, Hollywood, but then maybe the left could argue there's certain things that have skewed in the power of those on the right. I know you don't like those labels, but we both have our black on today. A little bit of irony there. It was a pleasure, Philip, to have you on. I suppose my closing comment would be, one, I enjoyed my conversation with Philip. I'm going to rewatch it myself. I learned so much. One, how I could get better, and cringe moments when I'm asking questions that I believe I could have phrased differently. Philip was very eloquent. We agreed actually on some things and disagreed on others, and that's what creates an open and honest discussion. I do look forward one day in the future to a part two. I will absolutely give consideration to the Cambridge opportunity. It's an opportunity for me to learn and be around other incredible families. Yes, and I'm responsible for this as well. The world is in chaos, nuclear, AI, there's so much going on, civil unrest, all of it's true. Has the world never not been in chaos? Now, maybe a different perspective without nuclear and AI not being as global at the blink of an eye. And arguably, has it never been better for someone? I come from a wickedly poor background, at least in the US, although I travel the world, that's what I could talk about. The access to some of the tools I'm mentioning, including AI, the way that we treat entrepreneurship, which is a massive advantage to the US. We don't look at failure or bankruptcy as an end. We're very favorable as a culture to creating businesses. We don't put regulatory issues in the way. There are grave challenges in the US, and I'm very familiar with them. And I do believe we'll have massive civil unrest, midterms, the next election, and grave challenges that AI is going to cause in the short term. There is no way around that from my perspective. We'll have conversations and see if we could smooth that over. I don't know. We shall find out. But I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a different conversation, one that challenged some assumptions, was a little bit of disagreement and back and forth, although I'd like to hope a respectful. Philip Marcovici, I appreciate you as a guest. I hope people have a chance to reach out to you, and a newer audience may be watching in live for me. I'm Angelo Robles. You could go to angelorobles.com and learn more about membership and engagement. From the perspective of family offices, I've been in the community for decades, and I enjoy geopolitical, macroeconomic investing, and broadly AI and international issue discussions for family offices, bring great experts like Philip, who we're talking to now, and provide resources, opportunity, and peer connection for families around the world. Philip, again, thank you for your time. I appreciate the extra time. Thank you.
Many thanks. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thanks, Angelo.
Pleasure's mine. Have a great day. Thank you.